Good morning. I'm Beth Emery. I'm past president of Alamo Breast Cancer Foundation and ABCF's alternate to the National Breast Cancer Coalition Board. Welcome to ABCF's 28th Annual Alamo Advocate Program, created in partnership with the founders of SABCS to enhance the educational and relationship building experiences of advocates attending this program. We are pleased to have you all here in person and those who are online virtually. This year we have one of the largest Alamo Scholar classes in our history, 36 scholars, of which 30 are sponsored by Alamo and 4 by Teresa's Research Fund and 2 by the Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance. The scholars come from 16 states plus Puerto Rico and 8 countries. We also have 7 wonderful volunteer advocates serving as their mentors. This year, the Alamo Advocate Program is dedicated to the woman, my mentor, who founded both ABCF and the Alamo Advocate Program, Dale Eastman. We are delighted that SABCS dedicated the plenary session this morning to Dale as well, which was on advocacy. Most of you were there, I think. Now, Natalie Belcher will present the moment of silence, something that NBCC and ABCF do before each of our programs. Natalie?
Good morning. In 1991, at age 44, Shirley Metz was diagnosed with early-stage ductal carcinoma in situ. 12 years later, she was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. In her professional life, Shirley was the principal of a high school nationally recognized for excellence by the U.S. Department of Education and Newsweek. Following her diagnosis, she decided to retire and learn more about the science behind the disease, putting her speaking and writing skills to work to advocate on behalf of others. She empowered herself by graduating from NBCC's Project Lead Clinical Trials and Project Lead Quality Care. She served as a consumer reviewer for the Department of Defense Breast Cancer Research Program, chair of the Metastatic Breast Cancer Patient Advocate Subcommittee of the Translational Breast Cancer Research Consortium, chair of the Advocacy Committee for the University of Chicago SPORE, and as president of the Metastatic Breast Cancer Network. Shirley served as the Illinois Field Coordinator for NBCC and was an advocate participant with the NBCC's Artemis Project. She also served on the NBCC Board of Directors, representing the Metastatic Breast Cancer Network. She spoke out about the need for research to find the causes of metastasis at several conferences and to congressional leaders in Washington, D.C. Her focused mission was to use her voice to represent the needs of those who have advanced disease and to urge researchers to make finding causes for metastasis a priority so that no individual will receive such a diagnosis in the future. She received many awards, including being nominated by NBCC and named a Champion of Change in Breast Cancer by the Office of President Obama in 2012. Shirley passed away in July of 2025. Please join me in a moment of silence to remember Shirley. Thank you.
Before I turn the program over to FDA, I want to acknowledge our sponsors who make this program possible. Their logos are shown on the slide on the screen. Our premier sponsors are Genentech, Pfizer, Menarini Stemline, Lilly, Novartis, and Cyber Media Productions. Collaborating sponsors are Daiichi Sankyo, Merck, AstraZeneca, and Natera, and contributing sponsor is Exact Sciences. And with that, I will turn it over for one of our most popular sessions, a Q&A with the Food and Drug Administration, Oncology Center of Excellence, and the leader will be Dr. Garcia-Jimenez. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. We are, clapping. My name is Maria Garcia-Jimenez. I'm a medical reviewer at the FDA with the breast and gynecologic malignancies team. I have been at the FDA for a little bit over a year, but I heard a lot from my colleagues about this session and how exciting it is for us to be able to interact with all of you and answer your questions and hear your thoughts and your experiences. So I am very excited to be here and to have the opportunity to moderate with all these wonderful colleagues who are very knowledgeable. One housekeeping item that I think wasn't mentioned was that we're happy to hear all of your questions, but we may not be able to answer questions that are specific about products that are under review or that are going to be under review. So we do apologize about that in advance. Like Beth said, we'll be taking questions from inside the room. Feel free to line up at the microphones. We'll also be taking questions online. To start us off, I'm just going to have everyone introduce themselves and their role at the FDA.
Thanks, Maria. Hi, everyone. My name is Mirat Shah. I'm a medical oncologist specializing in breast cancer at the FDA, along with all of my wonderful colleagues on this stage. I really look forward to this event each year, and thanks to all of you for being here and for being willing to share your experiences with us.
Hi, my name is Christy Osgood. I'm actually a pediatric oncologist by training, but I've been working in the Division of Oncology 1 for the last almost 6 years now. And I second what Mirat said about being here, and this is one of my favorite events of the year. In fact, when we asked Maria to help take over moderating this session, I was like, do it, it's the best one. I love it. It keeps me going all year long. When the days get long and hard, I just think of you all, and so I'm very happy to be here with all of my colleagues.
Thank you, Christy. My name is Melanie Royce. I've been in the FDA for well over 6 years now, and prior to that, I was in academic medical practice for over 20 years, specializing in management of breast cancer and running a breast cancer program. I echo Dr. Osgood's sentiment. This is really a highlight for us at the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium, because you are the reason why we do public service. You are the public, you are why we work at the agency. So this is really a highlight for us. We're looking forward to your questions, and hopefully we will be able to provide you with, if not a satisfactory answer, at least an answer that you will find interesting and maybe have additional answers later.
Thank you. My name is James Buturla, and I am also a medical oncologist and a medical reviewer in DO1 at the FDA. This is my first time joining the panel, and I'm very excited to be able to answer your questions. And like Melanie said, give you as much information as I'm able to and be as helpful as possible. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tatiana Prowell. I feel like the grandmother of this session. I've been at FDA for 19 and a half years, and I've been involved in this panel since the very first time it was done. So it's great to be back, and definitely feel like I'm here among friends. And I just want to offer you all reassurance that at a time that many things are changing and that there is so much very exciting science happening and so much very exciting drug development happening in breast cancer, that we are here, these are our faces, we are the people that are reviewing these drugs, helping to design these trials, and hoping to bring you safe and effective products as quickly as possible. So thanks so much for having us back.
Great, thank you all. So to start us off, Beth did collect a few questions and shared them with us. I'll use some of those to start us off, but great, I see somebody lining up already. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but we'll try to prioritize questions inside the room, and then questions that come online, and then these questions that were shared with us. So I'm going to start with Christy. And this is a question about single trials for approval. There were several questions about this, so I think it's a topic that many of you are interested in. So Christy, the question was, if the FDA moves toward allowing approval based on single trial, what safeguards will ensure that the trial is sufficiently rigorous from a statistical, methodological, and clinical standpoint to support approval for millions of patients?
Okay, I think this is a great question because it's a very hot topic right now in the media across the FDA with, things coming out and saying, I basically want to reassure people that from an oncology perspective, nothing is really going to change from what we've been doing, even if this goes through in other divisions. I have to say it's not a single trial in the sense that we're not going to get a phase 1 trial and then start approving agents. It's a single trial with other evidence of efficacy, which is actually the standard that we have been using for a very long time in oncology, across oncology, not just in breast cancer, but across all diagnoses. We expect one well-controlled, well-conducted randomized trial to come in for approval with supporting evidence, whether that supporting evidence is from phase 1 data, whether that supporting evidence is from phase 2 data. Hard to say what those actually mean in this day and age, but is it that we have a dosage optimization trial that's supporting the efficacy? Is it that we have non-clinical data? All of those things will still be reviewed. We will still expect a positive risk-benefit assessment from a trial in order to approve an agent. We will still be safeguarding approvals. We will still be having similar requirements that we've always had in the post-marketing setting to continue to follow for things like overall survival or new toxicities that are seen in the longer term setting and all of those sorts of things. So I guess my thing is that for us, it's not really going to change a lot of what we do, even if this becomes more of a requirement from the commissioner. We are going to still be looking at least one well-designed, well-controlled clinical trial for approval, as well as other evidence, and that's what we will call substantial evidence of efficacy, and that's what we have always been looking at. So I guess we just want to provide you reassurance that we're still here to be looking out for the best of you and to be making decisions based on the best evidence that we can, and always trying to make a positive risk-benefit determination where we look at all of the evidence that we have and we say, yes, this drug is going to be good for patients and provide you with the information about the drug so that you can all make the best decisions for yourselves. So we had a lot of questions on that, and I think that hopefully I answered a lot of it. If there's more out there, we're happy to answer that. But from our perspective, and actually I think across all of oncology at the FDA, so if you know people with other tumor types or things like that, it's going to be the same. We're going to still be looking at the same land, and we're still going to be providing advice prior to approval. So hopefully we get the best trials for people to enroll in.
Thank you, Christy. I don't know, anyone else have any other comments about single trials for approval? Great. Please.
Thank you. Elisa Sharago. I'm an Alamo Scholar, and with Elisa Sharago, Alamo Scholar, and with the IBC Network Foundation. And I have a question about inflammatory breast cancer. I know that the FDA has really been pushing for inclusion in trials, which we very much appreciate since we were historically excluded from trials, sometimes because we skewed their results downward. My question is this. I was speaking with somebody from the pharmaceutical company that was kind enough to speak to me, and they suggested that a good way for inflammatory breast cancer patients to get information is to try to get a post-marketing study. And I wanted to know if that is as effective or as beneficial as being included in a study and then but being separated out so that we can collect statistics and data on IBC, because as of now, there is no drug specifically approved for IBC. So any of the panel?
Does anyone want to start? Go ahead.
I'm happy to start.
Go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I'm happy to start talking about this. I recognize that this is a group that has huge unmet need, both because patients get diagnosed and they have to make a decision so quickly about what to do. So enrolling in clinical trials is often a challenge because people are saying, we want you to start chemotherapy in the next few days or tomorrow. So it's a very overwhelming thing. And I think that at the same time, we want a good evidence base, right? We want people to be able to take treatments that they know were studied in patients like themselves. And so there's this tension there when we think about how to treat an individual patient and how to approach this as a regulator. I will say most of our trials at this point are designed around specific subgroups, right? So based on the big receptor types and in some cases additional mutations, for example, or other markers. And I think that that's the way that patients with inflammatory breast cancer are currently being included. The advantage of that is that I think that when you just remove that barrier of exclusion, it's not that people can't access trials. In the past, it was like, even if you wanted to be in a trial, even if you were in a center with a lot of trials, most of those trials explicitly excluded people with inflammatory breast cancer. I think that that's less commonly the case now. So I like that approach in the sense that it means more trials are likely to be open to you. You should have access to the same trials as anybody else with the same receptor status, but it does mean that in any given trial data set, there might only be a handful of people like you. And this is sort of the same situation that we're in with male breast cancer, where like we've solved the problem that you just can't get in the trial, and so you can be in there, but we haven't solved the problem that there's not a lot of data on people like yourself. So I think it sort of depends on which problem we're trying to address more. I think if you want robust information about people with inflammatory breast cancer, a post-marketing study is nice because it means that you'll have a whole group of those people, but it might take a while to enroll. Like it's going to be after the whole trial, the main trial is done. It might be after the FDA approval is given. So we have to wait longer for that information, but it means we have a bigger body of evidence about patients with inflammatory breast cancer. I think if you simply include them in the trial, there's no guarantee that they're going to be in there. So that's the challenge, right? You can access the trial, but if it turns out that the trial enrolled 400 people and nobody with inflammatory breast cancer was enrolled, we haven't learned anything about that subtype, which is different in some ways. I think from a pure regulatory standpoint, though, to just put on that hat for a second, we have not been writing, I can't think of any examples where we've been writing indications in breast cancer. So the statement of how the drug can be used, where we've said, this can't be used in people with inflammatory breast cancer. Even if none of those patients have been included in the studies, we've not been excluding them from the indication. So I think it's just this balance of like access in terms of insurance. I don't think that that's a barrier right now because the indication statement is written broadly. But I think we do have an absolutely an information barrier where we don't have enough data. So I'd be curious what other people on the panel think and what other people in the room think about this. I think the idea of continuing to include them in the main study is great, but maybe what we should be doing as regulators is then when we get those data sets, if we see that this is a setting where we know inflammatory breast cancer occurs, but we have none or very few of those patients in the trial, then we think about having that as a post-marketing study that we would ask the company to agree with doing in a small number of patients, but concentrated on that subset. But it's a challenge, though, always for patients with a rare subset like that. That's a great question.
It may be a place to also use more of a pragmatic trial design where they're collecting less information, but at least we'll have something a little bit more. If you've heard anything about all of the pragmatic trials that we're trying to get off the ground, and done some in the lung cancer space where you're just, you have a specific question, it's a smaller number. It makes the trial more accessible and those sorts of things. So that would be maybe a place where we could do something like that in order to get more information, because we would love to have more information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I think Dr. Royce, this sort of makes me think of a theme that came up in some of the questions around real-world evidence and real-world data and how we think about that. Dr. Royce, do you want to speak to that?
I'll address that maybe in the setting of post-approval where we either issue a post-marketing commitment or a post-marketing requirement. And typically this is in the subpopulation of rare or very small numbers of patients that are represented in the trial, even if every effort has been made to make the eligibility criteria already broad. So one instance, for example, is male breast cancer, where even if we say we don't exclude males, but there were no males enrolled, or only 1 or 2 patients. So we may, or even minorities, racial minorities, they weren't excluded, but very few were enrolled. So we may ask the applicant to give us more information. They could use real-world data, they could use a registry if that was appropriate, etc., and come back and tell us more about how this drug affects this specific population. Now, you all also have a role, because if you think there is a way that we can make either the criteria broader for your participation in a trial, or maybe ideas, because many of you would have the opportunity to sit in committees that suggest how a trial is designed. This is an opportunity for you to do that, and we listen. So if you have great ideas, let us know.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to move over to this microphone. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rosalind Borogen, and I am a breast oncology navigator. I work with Michigan Medicine, University of Michigan. So I've asked this question before, but it was not well addressed, so I took my time to write it out, so that way, hopefully, it will be well addressed. So given the persistent underrepresentation of minority population, especially Black women, in breast cancer clinical trials, what specific oversight mechanism or external bodies beyond internal FDA review are in place to ensure that drug approvals truly reflects safety and effectiveness for all population? Additionally, what concrete steps is the FDA taking to strengthen accountability and require more inclusive trial designs before a drug can be approved? Thank you.
Thank you. That is a great question. There were two questions there, right? And I'm trying to remember the first one. I apologize. The first was about what things outside of the FDA are in place to try to improve representation of Black women, specifically in clinical trials. Dr. Prowell, do you want to start?
Sure. So several years ago, in 2017, there was an effort between FDA, Friends of Cancer Research, which is an advocacy group for anyone not familiar with them, and ASCO to modernize eligibility criteria. We had large working groups that had representatives from sort of the entire oncology ecosystem, including, importantly, patients present, about how we could make sure that every eligibility criterion that was listed in a clinical trial was really essential for either the interpretation of the trial or protection of patient safety or characterizing the population, with a goal of removing some of those criterion that had historically excluded many groups, including racial minorities and other groups. And so those recommendations were published in a special issue of Journal of Clinical Oncology about modernizing eligibility criteria for oncology clinical trials. And subsequently, FDA wrote guidances also sort of establishing those principles for ourselves as an agency. And after that time, there were a number of changes made. For example, all clinical trials that were conducted through the NCI, through cooperative groups, were required to use a new template where the eligibility criterion had been expanded or modified based on these recommendations. And we've seen that that has resulted in improvement in the diversity of patient population enrolled. That being said, I have sat in this meeting and looked repeatedly at the demographic slide and seen Black women are 3% over and over and over. I've seen it in multiple presentations at this meeting, and obviously 3% is not the representation of Black women in the community of people with breast cancer. So we are failing at this. I think it's important to just say that clearly. So the question is, if modernizing these eligibility criteria is not enough, then what is missing? And I think that there are a few things that are missing. I'm actually going to hand this back to Maria in a moment because no one is more interested and has done more work around this than she has. But I think that, some things that immediately come to mind are we need to ensure that when we have patients being enrolled at clinical trial sites, that the people who are speaking to the patients about these clinical trials represent the groups of people that we're trying to enroll from. I think this is an issue of trust. I think this is an issue of communication. I think this is an issue of cultural competence. I mean, there are many different ways that you can frame this, but the bottom line is I think if you're sitting there and you're meeting with a doctor who doesn't look like you, and you're meeting with a study coordinator who doesn't look like you, and you're signing your consent with a person who doesn't look like you, I don't know. I'm a member of, I'm a white woman. This is not my lived experience to be a Black woman, but I can imagine that if I went in to enroll in a clinical trial and absolutely nobody looked like me or seemed familiar to me, that I would be viewing everything with a lot more skepticism. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'll say is that what has been shown repeatedly by many different groups is that when people are approached and offered clinical trials, that members of minoritized groups are just as likely as members of majority groups to say they want to participate. So I think there's also a problem that maybe we're not approaching these patients, or maybe these trials are not being conducted in sites where these patients are concentrated. So a lot of trials are happening in academic centers where you may have racial imbalances that don't reflect the population, right? You're more likely to go get a second opinion if you're wealthy, if you're white. I mean, we know that these are issues. So I'm going to pass this back to Maria, who's been very interested in site selection and who previously worked in a safety net hospital in Los Angeles, to talk a little bit more about this.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Prowell. So as Dr. Prowell said, I spent several years before joining the FDA doing work in trying to improve representation in clinical trials of all the people, right, who get breast cancer and other cancers. And I think the second part of your question was about what things outside of the FDA can be done. Dr. Prowell touched on one of them that I think is very important, and that's site selection. Like, where are these clinical trials being conducted? And I think, I don't necessarily know where the FDA would fit in this, but something that even all of you could be doing as advocates in your interactions with pharmaceutical companies, right, is asking for trials to be open in your communities, in the communities of the patients that you represent, right, and really having them acknowledge and take those steps. They are ultimately the people that choose where to open the clinical trials, right, and to fund the clinical trials in different areas. And I do think it would make a lot of difference for people to be having access to clinical trials and learning about clinical trials in the communities that they live. And as Dr. Prowell mentioned, there's, in the literature, right, you see that there's very different demographics of the patients who go to academic centers or university hospitals or cancer centers compared to patients who are accessing care in community hospitals or even safety net hospitals. And so I think that's one really important thing that, can be thought about outside of what the FDA is doing. And the other thing I think is related to pragmatic clinical trials, sort of as we were talking about, right? If a patient is interested in a clinical trial, but they have to drive 3 hours to an academic center to get there, or they have to get their labs done twice a week and drive 3 hours to an academic center to get there, they're less likely to participate in a clinical trial, especially if you take into account that many underserved or underrepresented groups of people or communities, right, have additional burdens, caregiving, children, jobs, et cetera. So I think another thing to really think about is how are we designing clinical trials, and are they designed in a patient-centered way that can really allow for people of all demographics who have this disease or this diagnosis to be able to participate in clinical trials. Anyone else want to comment?
Yeah, sure. Can I mention, I just wanted to mention a few of FDA's kind of activities in this space. I think that was great. So something that I think is related to this topic is that cancer drugs are increasingly approved on the basis of global trials, but we still need to make sure that the results are applicable to, we're US regulators, we need to make sure the results are applicable to people in the US who will receive that drug if approved. And so something that FDA did in the past couple of years is start this project called Project Site Selector to encourage, really with our strongest encouragement, to encourage drug companies to really think about how will these results be applicable to US patients, and to open sites to really think about how can we open kind of as many sites in the US to enroll patients in the US as possible, and think about that early in their overall development plans. And then also during the during the pandemic, FDA really did a lot to think about how can clinical trials be more flexible, but still, the results can be used for us to make our determinations about benefit risk. So there's a lot that was done about kind of the flexibilities that could be in place in clinical trials. And so, a lot of times it's not necessarily us that are saying labs have to be collected at, this specific site, or imaging has to be conducted at this specific site. Those are things that are coming from kind of the people designing the trial. So kind of another way that if you are going to be involved in having insight into these trials and providing your thoughts on these trials, think about those things and how those things might be made a little bit more flexible to allow more people to enroll to those trials.
Dr. Royce. I want to also make one point. Remember that the FDA does not make drugs. We approve drugs. The makers of drugs are drug companies. And they really design, for the most part, their trial and choose where they want to conduct their trial. We make recommendations, but we cannot mandate that. Now, if you look at the more recent past, a lot of the drugs we have approved were conducted on a multi-regional basis, meaning to say they were conducted globally, so to speak. And as a consequence, in fact, if I look at trials that were done, let's just say in the 1990s, 80% and over were white women. Most of them were conducted in North America and Western Europe. Now I look at the demographics and I see almost 50% Asian. Okay, now we know why, because there were multiple sites that were opened in Asia. If we want Black women, why not sites in Africa? There are no sites that have enrolled in Africa. If we want Latin or Hispanic women and men, Latin America, there are some sites in Latin America that are included in multi-regional trials, but not really very robust or always. So again, we bring this back to you. You are the advocates. You really have a strong voice in telling the drug companies, listen, we want representation, and if it is not here in the US, at least find people that are like us and do your trials so that we can have information about how applicable that drug is going to be for us.
I guess I'll just add one more thing. Once drugs are approved, you might all be sitting there thinking, okay, that's great, but she still just said all those trials had 3% Black women, and that's an absolutely valid criticism. So the question is, what levers do we have to pull on the back end once the study is done? So I'll give you like a concrete example of this. So I was the reviewer for the NATALEE trial, which was the adjuvant ribociclib trial in ER positive, HER2 negative breast cancer. And when we received those data, it's a huge study, 5,000 patients. We received these data on the back end. And there are very, very few Black women enrolled, very little racial diversity in general. And so as a post-marketing study, we told the company, you have to provide us information on a more racially diverse population that is representative of the United States so that we can be confident that all of these results are applicable to a broad US population. And so they have a study that they're conducting. We told them this can be an ongoing study, this can be a new study that you plan, or this can be real world evidence, but you have to collect this data on a more racially diverse population and provide it to us. And post-marketing study is described to them in the approval letter that they actually receive. So we will get that data, but I just want you to know that I hear you, that it's not acceptable that we have that at the time of initial approval. It's not okay at all. It's not okay with me, but there we go again. It's not okay with me. You'd think I wouldn't be doing that this many years into this, but it's not okay with me, and I don't think it's okay with any of us. So we really do hear you on this, and I think the place to intervene is upstream, having sites in more diverse places. Like, that's the bottom line.
And I guess I'll just ask or say thank you for your question, and please keep asking that question until something changes, because we all, I think, feel that it shouldn't be this way. And so Just keep asking. Oh, go ahead, James.
I was just going to also, it's very similar to what my colleagues have already said, but I think that the two key things that we can do and have been doing are to ask pointed questions about why sites are enrolling in places where they're unlikely to be representative of the U.S. population, which we do often ask. We'll ask pointed questions, well, why are you enrolling here? Why aren't you enrolling in a place where you might find a more representative population? So we do ask those questions, and that's one thing that we can do that can be effective. And the other thing is to encourage trial designs that are feasible outside of just a couple of locations. Because if you have a trial design that's only feasible in 10 locations, well then that immediately limits the representativeness of the population that you may find. So those are two things that we are actively doing. They have some effect, but obviously more needs to be done.
Yeah. Any other final comments? Sorry, cut anyone off. Okay, thank you. And then I think I was here, so I'll go back to this microphone.
Sure. Hi, my name is Tammy Eagle Bowling. I'm also here as an Alamo Advocate Scholar. I'm the creator of Light Up NBC Live, and I'm currently living with metastatic breast cancer. My question is more about the transition from clinical trial phase to actually FDA approval and just the overall timeline that takes. Right now, patients are still told an average 2 to 3 year life expectancy, with only about 10% making it 10 years. So we're always holding on to that hope, living every day that we will live long enough to see the next approval being able to be used in the clinical setting. And I'm just wondering, especially since you've been there, so long, what advances you've seen over the last 10 years and how current technologies will improve efficiencies and perhaps unique collaborations that can help this approval process happen in shorter than the 8 years that we typically hear from mouse to market.
Yeah.
I feel like you've addressed me.
Yeah.
Am I
Would you like to start?
Should I start?
Yes.
I'm talking too much. I'm not going to say anything for like 20 minutes straight. So I think that I hear you absolutely, and I was saying this to Kelly Shanahan right before we started, who's been a friend of mine now for several years, that we absolutely feel this urgency for you. We are depleted. I'm sure if you've watched the news, you've heard that many people have left FDA in a variety of situations, and so there are fewer of us than ever at a time that breast oncology, drug development is proceeding really quickly. And so we are really working as hard as we possibly can to bring safe and effective products to you quickly. Trust, I really mean that. I think that the trial efficiencies issue, though, is so important, and the major thing that was alluded to before, but I think is so critical, is we need more decentralized clinical trials. So what that means are clinical trials where some or all of the elements of the trial take place not at a central location, like an academic center, or maybe not even like a trial site at all. So for example, you might have telehealth visits instead of having to travel to a site. You might have your blood draws be able to be done at a local, freestanding laboratory, rather than, or even possibly yourself. There are now devices where you can put on your arm and draw your own blood and mail this in. That you might have your vital signs collected from a wearable that you already own or that you're provided via the study. That you might get your imaging tests done locally in your community. And I think that those things speed up clinical trials in a number of ways. One is that you can enroll patients much more quickly, because if people don't have to think about, is that really feasible for me to go 3 hours and miss work every other week and, all the rest of that stuff, people can go into clinical trials much more quickly. This is not an oncology example. It's another area that I'm very interested in, which is long COVID. But I just heard that an academic center that is running a randomized placebo-controlled trial in long COVID enrolled their 1,000 patient study in about 4 weeks because the trial is fully decentralized. So it makes the point that if you make this convenient for patients, they will come. Even in that setting where some of the people enrolling in that trial are quite debilitated, like homebound or bedbound, sicker than many of our oncology patients now, actually. So I think we need more of that in oncology. The place that you guys can be involved in that as advocates is advocating for those elements, and the most critical one is telehealth. So all of you, I'm sure, have heard about, and you've experienced, because many of your patients being actively treated, that a lot of the telehealth flexibilities have been rolled back. So in the first year and a half or something of the pandemic, we as doctors could see patients across state lines anywhere. I could be sitting in Maryland at Hopkins, and I could be seeing a patient from Washington State, they didn't have to travel. And then that was scaled back so that then you could still do telehealth, but only in the states where you were licensed. And then now that's been scaled back further where, telehealth visits are not being covered in many settings. So a thing that you can do that's really concrete is call your Congress people and say, we want telehealth flexibilities back. We want insurance companies, both Medicare and Medicaid, but also private insurers, to be required by law to cover telehealth visits, the same as in-person visits. And we want telehealth flexibilities back across state lines to improve access to clinical trials. Like call, I don't know how many states y'all represent, but it's a bunch. Call them, email them, be a thorn in their side. Because this is a thing at a time that I think the country kind of needs bipartisan wins in Congress. Like, this is a thing that I think you could bring both sides together on, because cancer is very prevalent in red states and blue states. It doesn't matter. Everybody knows somebody who's had cancer. Many people are someone who's had cancer. This is a place that I think you could get consensus at a time they need consensus, and we need that access for patients.
Yeah, I hear you, and not even, that's an amazing suggestion. And I experienced that even just with regular doctor's appointments, because I drive and have to go an hour and a half to 2 hours, and it's across state lines, and the insurance won't cover it.
I know it.
To go in person, so I think it's a really great point.
Yeah.
I can also, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to add a little bit, and then I'll let Mirat. We've also done things with the FDA to try to get trials that have read out to get to us sooner, added flexibilities. We worked with the Friends of Cancer Research that Dr. Prowell referred to earlier to publish a paper as far as like what sort of flexibilities can we give to try to get that data, once the trial's enrolled, and because we know people are hanging on, and we definitely work to try to be as flexible as possible with the different drug companies, with the different agencies, with the different cooperative groups that are running some of the trials. That's to get the data to us in a way that we can review it as quickly as possible. As Dr. Powell noted, we are very depleted, but we are still working as hard as we possibly can to help design trials that will enroll quickly, that can read out quickly, that we can look at that. We also talk a lot about endpoints, and endpoints that we can look at sooner, so that we can have things for patients sooner, because we do know that patients are holding, and that's why we're all here. We're here to try to get things out to you as quickly as possible, but also safely. So we definitely work all the time, aside from, increasing enrollment and calling congressmen and doing all of that, those sorts of things, which I totally support. I also know that we are working all the time to try to make the trials as streamlined and as easily readable as possible, so that we can get things to you. And we have a lot of different programs for that, as far as trying to get that done.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, you spoke so clearly about kind of that lag that can occur between when the clinical trial reads out and kind of when the drug is approved, and that's the time that we're taking to do our review. And so a few FDA efforts in that space to reduce that time. We have a program called Real-Time Oncology Review, where if the company, rather than having everything ready to go, which can take a lot of time, they can kind of submit their drug application in pieces and allow us to start reviewing kind of sooner than when that complete application is in. And that's something that we're doing to try and really address the problem that you outlined. Something else that we do is we ask the companies to submit things in a very specific format, because what we learned is that sometimes we can spend a lot of time just looking for things in the submission or copying things, and we really want to spend our time on kind of the critical thinking about the drug and, is the benefit risk favorable, and not spending our time looking for things or copying things. And so we've asked for things in this specific format, which has really allowed us to also streamline our review and try and address this problem that you outlined.
Thank you for all you do. You provide hope for a lot of people.
Thank you for your question. I'm going to hop back to this microphone here. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shanahan, living with, or as I prefer to say, not dead yet, with metastatic breast cancer for 12 years. I am the president of Mediviver, and I am a member of the Patient-Centered Dosing Initiative. First, I want to thank you for the work you're doing. I know it's much harder in the current environment and with the lower number of regulators that you have, so thank you. My question, and also, by the way, Tatiana, I've already tweeted out the call to call our representatives about telehealth coverage. Tweeted it out standing here. My question is, the FDA has Project Optimus, which is asking drug companies to look at multiple doses of drugs, which is incredibly important. The maximum tolerated dose is not the be-all and end-all, and it causes so many more side effects. But another area that we patients are screaming for in trials is crossover. If there is a trial where there's one-to-one randomization to standard of care versus the investigational agent plus standard of care or whatever it is, and you are placed into that standard of care arm and you have progression, like, why should I stay in the trial? So I'm wondering if there is any appetite for a project crossover, just like there is Project Optimus.
Yeah, I feel like that's been recently discussed in different forums, actually, and may come up at one of our sessions later, I think. But I mean, I feel like any of us could answer it. James, do you want to go ahead and start?
With crossover? Sure. I mean, so I think that when trials do include crossover, we always look at that from at least a couple of different perspectives. One of them is, what does this say about the expectation going into the trial? Was there really equipoise? Did we really think that the standard of care was appropriate to begin with? So that's one thing that we always do kind of think about and question, was the trial well designed to begin with? So that's a question that we obviously have to think about with all trials, is the suitability of the control arm. And that's an important question for us. And then in terms of interpreting the results of crossover, the questions that we have related to interpreting the results of trials that include crossover have to do with its impact on overall survival. And obviously those are the questions that the companies designing the trials are also thinking about. So those are, I guess, two of the main factors that we think about in interpreting the inclusion of crossover in trial designs. And I will also open this up to others for input on the question, kind of how things may change going forward.
We are against it. We do what James was speaking of are the things we think about when we are talking with drug companies or looking at data that has had crossover, like what are we going to do with it? But we absolutely have an appetite for it, particularly if it allows us to keep the patients enrolled in the trial, because we know that when early data comes out and something is really exciting, equipoise may already be lost. I can think of the Pluvicto example in prostate cancer, because it's another drug regulated in our division, and they just no one wanted the standard of care, and they had to introduce some crossover so that we could keep equipoise in the trial. So we look at it from all of those different perspectives, and we absolutely do have an appetite for it, particularly if we feel like we're not going to be able to keep people enrolled, because we do need people to stay enrolled in these trials so that the data can be interpretable, because if we have informative censoring on the back end, which is sort of the very broad statistical term for when too many people drop out early because they got randomized to the control arm and they're not happy about it, and we can't blind all these trials because of side effects, because you can't, it's not ethical to give a specific kind of placebo. So, we know that this is going to happen, and crossover is one of the ways that we talk about a lot, and we just have to be able to plan for it so that when we look at the statistical analysis on the back end, we know what we're looking at, and it has to be done in an appropriate way. But I do absolutely think we have an appetite for it so that patients can know that, we do care that they're getting the therapy. That's, important to everybody.
I just think sometimes there are some misconceptions about what FDA has said about crossover. Like sometimes I'll hear, FDA mandates no crossover. And I think it's always important for us at every opportunity to just be able to say that we don't have like an FDA line that we don't allow crossover. It's something that we do allow for. And as my colleagues alluded to, we just want to understand, how it might affect the results. And we think it's very important to be able to keep people on clinical trials so we can interpret the results. I think the other thing that I often hear is that FDA requires overall survival for drug approval, and that's also something that, one of the ways in which we've been able to expedite safe and effective therapies is by allowing approvals based on earlier endpoints and still looking at overall survival, because ultimately that's what we want to have an impact on. But those are just, I guess, common things that I've heard others say that FDA has said that are not, necessarily representative of our views when we're examining these clinical trials.
So flat out, we do have an appetite for it. We are not against it. We just, as James said, we just have to take all of the considerations for it when the trial is being designed. But
Thank you. Just as you've encouraged companies to look at different doses, I hope you can encourage companies to consider crossover.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to this microphone.
Hi, I'm Jill Canales, and I'm with the Memorial Care Cancer Institute. My role is I run a lay peer navigation group of about 85 women who have all had breast cancer, and we support newly diagnosed patients literally from their first consultation all the way through treatment and into survivorship. With that being said, I recognize some of you from previous years. I hope you don't recognize me because I'm going to bring up the same topic that I brought up before, but it's around drug companies and advertising. And just a quick story, I was waiting for the bus to ride over here this morning, and I saw this literal, it looked like a freezer box truck. And it had a sign on it, a digital sign that was advertising for a drug for metastatic breast cancer. And I'm just thinking, what benefit is this possibly going to bring to the patients? They're driving around town in a truck. I don't think the doctors or the clinicians or the decision makers are going to go, I'm gonna prescribe that drug now because it's on the side of a box truck. And I walk around these, just at this one conference, every escalator and every side is plastered with all of this stuff from all these companies. And one of the things that I try really hard to help our patients with is the financial part of treatment. Newer drugs obviously cost significantly more. And so I'm wondering, I know there's a lot of pushback on this administration, but the one thing I was very hopeful for in the beginning, there was discussion around limiting advertising for drug companies. Is that happening? I know it's not entirely within your purview, but it doesn't even necessarily have to be an all or nothing, but is there any plans, talks, thoughts about limiting the amount of advertising that they can do? Because as you guys know better than anybody, we in this country are paying the vast majority of drug costs, and something has to give. And the amount of money going out in advertising by these companies is astronomical. So that's my question.
Anyone want to take this one?
Which is, I totally share your concern, and I have thought this for a long time, and not just about oncology drugs, but about, you're watching football on TV on a Sunday afternoon and all you see is drug commercial after drug commercial after drug commercial. And when it's a drug that we've been involved in the regulation of, I'm like, do people even understand what they're saying? And are they calling their oncologist and saying, or calling their family care provider and saying, I think I have breast cancer, I need that drug? It doesn't make sense to me. I totally agree with you. And so I am with you on that. I will say there have been at least some things that I have heard of where we're trying to make the ads better, which is I have a friend who's in, she does the voiceover. She's a voiceover actress, and she does drug commercials. And she said that they used to be able to say the side effects so quickly, and now they have to say them at the same speed and volume that they say everything else. So there's at least that going for us. As far as, I will go back to what Dr. Prowell said, call your congressman. We don't actually have the ability to tell them when, where, and how they can advertise. We do have the ability to, if we see an ad that we think is inappropriate, untrue, misrepresentative, sometimes with some of the drugs you see, so-and-so's on this drug and they're out dancing in a field and it looks so beautiful, and it can be very misleading. You can report those ads to the FDA, and we do have the ability to say, you can't keep doing that ad anymore because of X, Y, and Z, or you're misrepresenting your data. And we certainly do report, and the email address for that is badad@fda.hhs.gov. And you can report any advertisement that you see, and then it gets looked at. So we do have the ability to do that. We do not have the ability to regulate how much they spend, where they advertise, but we can look at the content. So I will say I'm in 100% agreement with you. My father was a family physician for 50 years, and when drugs were allowed to advertise, he hated it because it absolutely changed how he had to practice, and he just didn't think that, not that patients shouldn't be educated, but that it ended up taking up so much of his day-to-day time, and then it's money that they're spending and increasing the cost. So absolutely, we can't stop it, but I do think if you see an ad that you don't like, please do report it. Those are all investigated. And then also, again, back to a way to reduce drug costs, which the administration says they would like to do. So I would say call your congressman, and we're with you, I think, is the best thing that I can say. But I would agree, I'll stand on this soapbox with you.
I still remember, because I've been in practice long before I came to the FDA, when direct consumer advertising was not allowed.
Yeah, that's right.
But now it is that FDA didn't put in that permission. It wasn't us. So again, that's not within our purview. But a misleading ad, or even an ad saying persistence of effect, but we don't have the data to show persistence, we can act on that. If it's brought to our attention, or we see it, or put in, bad ads, we review it, and then we say, no, this must be taken down. But direct consumer advertising is something that you can do something about.
Hands-on experience with reviewing advertisements is that it's actually kind of interesting and complex, because you end up with the factual claims that they make in the text, but then also the way that the images are associated with those claims. And so we do look at all of that and look and say, well, these are the words you're putting there, but do the pictures suggest something different than the words do? And that can sometimes be something that we'll get feedback on, or even require it to be changed. But the overall tone of positivity that everybody knows is there, that can be a harder thing to regulate.
Great, thank you. The gentleman over here.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Ron C.W. Chidebe. I'm a patient advocate and the executive director of Project Pink Blue based in Nigeria. I think we all agree here that the involvement of patient in clinical trial, it's really critically important, and not just involving during when the study is done, or probably when struggling to recruit patient, but actually at least in the design. So I am actually very honored to be part of patient advocate that were invited. We're about 3 of us that were invited to be part of the new consult and spirit guideline for reporting randomized clinical trial, the 2025 statement. The good thing about this statement was, because we were invited as the patient advocate to be part of that committee, was we introduced new information, which is one, open science. And also, that's number one, open science. Number two is to get clinicians, clinical trialists, to actually also report patient and public involvement, right? And then also about trial monitoring as well, and also data sharing. And the good thing is that both JAMA, PLOS, Medicine, BMJ, and all these top journals where clinical trials are published actually endorse the spirit and consult statement. But my first question is FDA doing anything at all? Is there any guideline, any other sort of system to help really to ensure that clinicians consider reporting or even including patient and public, not just as steering committee or as committee, or maybe just have them at the end of the day that spend all this money and the trials really do not really make the meaningful change for the patient. That's number one. My number two question is that I was struggling to remember the name of the drug. I did a presentation about that at Dana-Farber. I forgot the name of the drug, but it's actually a drug for cervical cancer. We know cervical cancer, it's the huge burden is in, it's called the disease of the poor among ethnic minorities, sub-Saharan Africa, and all the rest. But there's a drug that was just approved by FDA, and I checked the data from the FDA website, and I realized that almost 70% of the participants in this trial are not even Black and ethnic minorities. These are the patients who really are the ones that are dying from this disease. So just want to know what is FDA doing to really create this awareness to ensure that clinicians really doing these trials are really thinking about this and probably tilting them in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's, I think, a topic we covered earlier. I don't know if anyone wants to start. The first part of your question was about
the spirit and consult and on patient involvement.
And if we have anything similar in terms of patient involvement.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that. I know nothing is.
Oh, no, please, someone else.
I was just going to say we have Project Patient Voice, where we do try to listen to patients. We also, if we have any data that's directly generated from patients, but isn't necessarily included in the label, which is our biggest way to be able to communicate the data that we have reviewed, aside from our reviews that are published. Or review articles that we publish. And there's a website where some of that data is published, and we definitely encourage that to get the patient's voice out there. As far as the minority enrollment, and those, we kind of addressed that with an earlier question with Project Site Selector and some other topics that other people brought up, but I don't know.
I can just add, I think, just like to share a personal experience, I think Kelly earlier alluded to Project Optimus, which is the FDA's effort to improve drug dosing for people with cancer, and that's kind of the effort that I've been most involved in at FDA. And we were writing guidance actually to encourage companies to really think about this very important question of drug dosing and making sure that they're characterizing the dosing well enough to be able to choose, especially in cases where a lower dose might have similar efficacy but better safety and tolerability, to really encourage them to look at different doses to do that. And it was very important that if we are trying for drug dosages to be safer and more tolerable, it's safer and more tolerable for whom? It's really important that patients are kind of involved in having insight into those, how those trials are set up and those decisions. And so when we were writing that guidance, we put a very clear statement in there that, if you're trying to make therapy safer and more tolerable, it's very important that you kind of involve patients and involve them early in the design of these trials to think about, how will you show that one of these doses is safer and more tolerable than the other. So that's just a personal, I definitely agree, very important to have, patient insight on the topics that will ultimately, they're the ones who will ultimately be taking these drugs if we approve them. So very important to have their input, and that's one example of where we really tried to do that.
I'll give you a piece of strategic advice maybe, because I know many of you actually do work directly with companies in different settings. You have to think like a company, okay? So even though these companies, when you're thinking of them, you might be thinking, oh, this company's mission is to develop cancer drugs. No. Publicly traded companies, their mission is to return a profit to shareholders. You have to understand that. They might do that by developing cancer drugs, but their mission is to return a profit to shareholders, okay? So I think that when you're talking to them, you need to frame your advice so that they involve patients in terms that will speak to that mission. So how do you do that? You say, if you have patients involved at the design stage, we're going to be able to help you identify barriers to accrual that are going to make your trial enroll much more slowly, or maybe not complete enrollment at all. We're going to help you identify problems with the control arm that might make people not want to go on your study, and then maybe you don't get to complete it. Or maybe the regulators aren't going to think that that's the greatest comparison at the end of the day. We're going to identify barriers to side effect management that might make people drop out. Right? We're going to help you think about that. So I think that, or we're going to identify barriers in how you're talking about this drug, or even how you're advertising this drug, that might make clinicians not want to prescribe it, or patients not want to take it, because it's not just getting the product across the finish line and getting it FDA approved. Like, that's the first step. But no one's making a profit just because we approve the drug. They're making a profit because we approve the drug, and then clinicians prescribed it, and then patients took it and stayed on it, right? So if that process fails at any point along the way, their mission of returning a profit to the shareholder is compromised. So when you talk to companies, you have to pretend like you're a business person. That is the way that you will have a high impact. even though you're bringing your patient experience to it and you're thinking about wanting new drugs for yourself and you're thinking about your friends who've passed away and your friends who are living with this disease, like speak to them in their terms. That's how you'll get heard.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I just saw we have about 10 minutes left, which should be a good time. I did want to also mention, I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning, that even though the recording will stop in about 10 minutes, some of us can stick around, and we'd be really happy to chat with some of you one-on-one or answer any additional questions. And I haven't seen any questions pop up online, but I may be missing them, but we'll wrap up some of the questions in the room. We'll hop back to the microphone over here.
Okay, my name is Fernell Branch. I'm from North Carolina. And the question I have is the reasoning behind the black box labeling on HRT. And we know that a lot of the cancers that women get are ER/PR positive and are hormone driven. So why was that black box labeling taken off of HRT and now it can be given freely?
That is an excellent question. Does anyone want to comment? I mean, I don't think any of us were, directly involved in any of this decision process, but Dr. Prowell, it seems like no.
Yeah, I said I wasn't going to say anything for 20 minutes.
Or, yeah, I mean, if anyone has anything.
I can say stuff about it, but Melanie, you actually practiced for a long time during that era when Women's Health Initiative data came out. Maybe you want to speak to it.
Yes, so when WHI came out and it showed that women were having worse outcomes, it increased the risk of endometrial cancer, it increased dementia, it increased the risk of thromboembolic events in some women. That was when the warning came up that this should be in the label of hormone replacement therapy. That hormone replacement therapy is not the be and end all for women to take so that they can feel better, younger, etc. However, recently, for various reasons, it wasn't our office, it wasn't the Office of Oncologic Diseases, but I believe it was the Office of Women's Health that looked at the label, and we were not involved at all in the decision making of removing the black box warning or whatever of that label because it wasn't in our office. So personally, I cannot speak as directly as to what discussions went in there, how rigorous was the evidence that was looked at that made them decide to remove that black box warning. And I will stop at that because others may want to speak to it.
I think it's just a challenging question to try to address. I think we all may have personal opinions or thoughts about it, but as FDA representatives, we weren't involved in the decision making. We don't know what the thought processes were internally, and so it's very difficult for us to comment.
For us to comment on the black box warning, I do know, and this is more of a personal, it was hard to prescribe to certain people who did really want it and were having conversations with their primary care providers. And I think for every woman, it needs to be a decision between them and their physician and their, so I think that may be, that's, my sister's a primary care provider, my father was a primary care provider, so, and they were all trying to look at the data themselves. So I think that is sort of where we're left, is that as an individual person, you kind of have to look at it, and we can't comment on the decision that was made by the Office of Women's Health and what data they reviewed because we're not certain. And so my advice would be to speak with your provider, speak with people who have looked at the data and know, and make your decisions based on that, rather than sort of the black box being added and then now the black box being taken away. Because I think it's a little opaque, so.
Any other comments? Okay.
So I just have, in 2012, December 12th at 1:32, we took a picture with the advocates and the FDA panel that was here, and So I would like to do that again. If y'all can stay for a few minutes afterwards, that would be fantastic. And you have taught advocacy so much, because, you know, the first class, everybody was afraid. It's like, oh my God, it's the FDA. But you have taught us that, yes, we are the FDA, but we are here for you. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well said.
And if any advocates can stay for the picture.
Like, oh my God, it's the advocates. You have taught us so much.
And we'd be happy to do the picture, the photo. Thank you for that. We have 4 minutes remaining, so we'll probably get to one more question. But again, we'll stick around and chat with all of you after the recording stops. Please go ahead.
I actually had 2 questions, and hopefully one of them's brief enough that we can get to both. Okay. The first is there any program at the FDA for streamlining the process of taking an already FDA-approved drug to a repurposing, where there's reduced costs for toxicology studies, anything like that in place yet?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not 100% certain exactly what you're talking about. If it's already an approved drug with a new indicate that we're looking at a different indication, we certainly do not go back and re-ask for animal studies or PK studies, and we're able to review the data much more quickly because we already have a body of data, right? So that kind of goes into the review process and can streamline it a little bit, certainly. As far as other ways to reduce cost or reduce sort of, I don't know if it would be repurposing, but we have 2 different programs, both the 505(b)(2) program. So most drugs, if it's like a brand new drug that we've never looked at before, you have to do everything. But if you want to look at a drug and it's the same drug, but you put it with a different salt, for example, you change the chemical formula slightly, we have a 505(b)(2) pathway where you may be able to not do animal studies on that drug, not necessarily do as many clinical studies, and just look at a much smaller body of data and get an approval for that. And that would be in our sort of our small molecules. When we're talking our biologics, there's a biosimilars program where you're basically looking at the same molecule and you can show that it's similar both from a chemical as well as a pharmacologic perspective and potentially get an approval. And we have some of those out. We are actually asking for less clinical data with those now as well. And that seems to be, there's guidances in draft for that right now. So there are different programs and what we require. There also we're requiring less animal studies if you can figure out a way to show us the toxicology information that we need, and that's definitely a push as well. So we certainly have quite a few programs at the FDA where we're trying to reduce costs, get more drugs to the people, and require while still maintaining rigor and making sure that the drugs people are getting are safe and effective and treating what they say they're going to treat.
Okay. We have a few seconds left. I don't want you to get cut off in the middle, but to you if you want to go ahead.
I think this is a very broad question, and maybe just a good place to end is there's been a lot of discussion about what the FDA can and can't mandate of drug companies, and I think there's a lot of there's not a good understanding, at least on my part, of what you can and can't mandate from a drug company.
I'll speak to one. We can't mandate price. We do not have a congressional mandate to regulate price. That is CMS's purview. So if they say, why are drug prices so high? It's not within the purview of FDA. That's one.
And we're actually out of time. So thank you all for your wonderful questions, the discussion. We'll stick around for a little bit. We can do the picture before we all kind of start mingling.
One of us has to run off.
And I must say, as my first time moderating, it was quite a pleasure. Everyone was right. This was a great session. Thank you for coming.